The problem is understanding when you go from, and I'm going to use, especially a higher level operating unit, and you're just one day from the next no longer in it. How do you mentally transition into being a no one, into being just a regular everyday citizen?
Welcome back to the Modern Agent Podcast. My name is Logan Ricchetti with Modern Realty. This podcast is a combination of thoughts and opinions on the real estate market in Midland, Michigan with our local real estate agents from Modern Realty. Our mission is to create informed and confident buyer and seller clients, so tune in to learn more about Midland's real estate market. How long were you in the military?
Close to a decade. So, joined in 2011, was out November of 2019.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Right before COVID.
Yep.
So.
And how old were you when you went in?
21.
What made you decide to take that route at that time?
Well, so I grew up in Mexico. Kind of was a little bit of a rough case in my childhood, if you will. Especially growing up in Mexico wasn't the easiest place really to grow up, especially when you're white.
Yeah.
So I had gone through EMTI school in Mexico, working for the Mexican Red Cross, super adrenaline junkie, if you will, but things were pretty tough there, especially dealing with, certain actors and individuals. So a lot of things happened, and I made the decision to move back to the States and ultimately join the Army. I said, I'm already doing this. At least if I'm going to get shot at, I'd like to be able to have the ability to defend myself.
So you were in a place that was that dangerous growing up that you were getting shot at?
I mean,
or at least the potential?
The entire country is, it kind of even flow and a little bit of turmoil, especially after like the 2006 presidential campaign happened. It really stuck a kind of a hand in the bee's hive.
Yikes.
And, all cartels and just kind of went haywire. So then control for different areas within the country took over.
Yeah. So
you see it on the news now, right? Places that were number one tourist destinations in the world now are, very standoffish, and people don't necessarily go there. And so, yeah, it was rough. I mean, there was days where Afghanistan wasn't as bad as Mexico sometimes.
Dang.
So, yeah.
So you came home from Mexico. Where did you go from there?
Straight to Bay City recruiting office, joined military, went to basic, my job training, first duty station, Germany. Immediately did a JSET and then
A what?
A JSET.
What's that?
Just kind of like a joint training exercise. And then jumped on a deployment to Afghanistan, route clearance, convoy escort teams. That was fun.
Yeah. Wait, so that was in the Army?
Yeah.
What year was that?
2013.
Dang. So there was a lot going on in 2013.
Yep.
That was a scary time to be doing that.
It was. It was fun, right? Looking back at it now, right? Of course, there's moments where you're like, man, this kind of sucks. But looking back at it, you're like, man, these are some of the best times I've ever had.
So you're doing you're doing a lot of things that we're not going to talk about, but you're doing route clearance, meaning you are ahead of a convoy and then you're protecting a convoy.
Yep. So
that's very dangerous work.
Clearing the road.
Yep.
Making sure that there's no, IEDs or ambushes or anything like that. And then, so that was fun, but I was missing something. I was part of this group who wasn't necessarily on the same level. I wanted more, when a lot of people were okay just kind of sitting back and whatever they had was good enough.
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't for me. And the military's funny, right? Because you get a lot of individuals from all over the place, right? Leadership styles are completely different. I wasn't your typical private coming in. I had already had life experiences. I wasn't, first time away from mom and dad. I had, essentially lived a life that most people will never live in 50 years. So when I got there, I always had some sort of issue with the leader appointed, above me. And just because I challenged them and I always wanted more. And some of them didn't respond well to that.
Sure.
Some of them respond really well to that. It's really figuring out how each of your subordinate learns. And 2012, 2013 timeframe, the Army really started pushing paperwork a lot. Whereas before then, it was a lot of like hands-on. I'm a hands-on learner. Like if I'm messing up and you put your hands on me, I'm going to learn. But if you give me a piece of paper reprimanding me, I'm like, man, I didn't learn anything from that. So got back from Afghanistan, went to the Special Operations Recruiting office, said, I need something more. Sat down with a recruiter, kind of told him my experience, my background. I was a 100% Spanish, native Spanish speaker, have some Portuguese. Special operations is split into different commands, if you will. So they're very language focused in that part of the world that you're going to work in. They want you to be able to operate at the highest level. So I already had a leg up. And so I trained for 2 months coming back from Afghanistan and jumped on a plane, went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, went through selection. It's a great process. You learn a lot about yourself.
This is Army Ranger selection?
Nope, this is Army Special Operations.
Okay, different track?
Yep, different track. Yeah, so Rangers are completely... Rangers, there's like 2 types of Rangers. Ranger qualified, where anybody can go to Ranger school, and then Rangers who operate out of Ranger battalions.
Okay.
So not all Rangers have the Ranger tab, especially starting out. But anyways, selection, you learn a lot about yourself. You really learn about adversity, because if you fail a certain event, the ability to bounce back and how well you can bounce back after that failure, where it doesn't derail your entire selection process, is really what they're looking for. It's intended for you to fail.
What was something that you failed in while you were going through that?
Well, I will say the biggest thing for me was the weather. I was training in Germany, 60-degree weather. I got to Fort Bragg, North Carolina in September, and it was like 90 degrees and humid.
Oh.
So I had been this stud in terms of physical fitness, and I get there, and so like your ruck marches and everything, they're untimed, unknown distance. They don't tell you how far you got to go and how quickly you got to move. They just say, grab your ruck, here's your starting point, and see you when you finish. And it's designed to do that so that you put in 100% effort at every single leg that you're facing throughout selection. And the weather got to me. I mean, it definitely made me slow down quite a few times. I was very close to being a heat casualty, which you'll get kicked out of selection for that, just because they don't want the internal problems, rhabdo and stuff like that. So
that means that you got so hot, so overworked, so exhausted that they almost pulled you out?
Yeah, so on the finish line, they have dunk tanks. You're supposed to like dunk your elbows and just kind of like sit in there for a little bit.
To cool off?
Bring your body temperature down. But I was completely out of it, falling over, just, and they're like, "Are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yep, I'm good." And instead of dunking, I just grabbed my ruck and I moved out so that I wasn't standing by a ton of cadre and them looking at me, seeing how I'm about to, pass out or whatever. So, but yeah, it's selection is like the first step, though. Just because you get selected doesn't mean you've done anything. Now you've got a year qualification course to go through, where selection, is 3 weeks. Qualification course is now a year. Could be longer depending on the language that you're in. So like Mandarin Chinese, Russian, those languages are longer in the pipeline. So those guys are spending, a lot more time in the schoolhouse. I actually was very fortunate where I actually skipped through language. I was able to test out, which was really cool too, because that just brought my track down so much quicker.
So you didn't have to go through a lot of the schooling to learn the language because you already were proficient enough at it that they pushed you through.
Yep.
And that accelerated your
Yeah, so
track.
you have to take what's called the defense language aptitude battery, and it's scored on reading, listening, and then you have an OPI, which is over the phone with a native speaker. So you just have a conversation in that language, and then they score you, and then your pay for that language is based on how you score. So I was able to max out, and they're like, dude, huge asset, white boy, blue eyes, speaks 100% fluent. It's awesome to have in the Southcom AOR, so let's push him in there.
So because of your background, your heritage, and your ability to speak this language, it makes you unique down there because not a lot of your pals can do that.
So it would be an understatement to say not a lot of them could do it, because
They could all do it.
they could all do it.
Yeah, but they're the top of the top, right?
Language school is designed to really hammer the language into you. It's almost like an immersion style training at base. But there was a lot of dudes, like a lot of Puerto Rican guys and Dominican guys and Colombians and Venezuelans that were in my same unit. So they were native speakers because that's where they were born and grew up at. But what made me unique was obviously my complexion and then my ability to speak and understand the language, where I could be utilized in different ways than other people. Put into a room, perception is reality. A lot of people may not think, I don't know if you've seen that guy on TikTok. He speaks Mandarin Chinese, and he goes around to all these Cantonese and Mandarin speaking restaurants and orders in English, and then he just starts talking to them in perfect Chinese, and they're all like, "Whoa."
Yeah, it's a huge asset to have that skill. You can conceal that for a while, and then you can get intel, and then eventually you can translate. Yeah,
Information.
You can translate, and then you can do there's a lot of things you can do with that. Now you can apply that to real estate as well now.
Yes.
So you can deal with people that speak Spanish or Portuguese even, and you can communicate really well with somebody like that.
Yeah, so I'm trying to tap into a niche market of, buying a house. I'm an English speaker, and understanding some of the legalities and the contracts is difficult for me. Not to mention, if English is not your first language,
Sure.
then what does that look like for them? Are they actually understanding the process? And if at Modern we're going to create confident and informed buyers or sellers, clients, then what does that process look like for people who don't have English as a first language? So if I can tap into that Hispanic population in here and be able to walk them through the process, then I don't think that there's very many agents in this area that can do that.
Yeah, I can't even think of any, maybe one or two. That's really valuable for anybody out there that struggles with English as a first language or as a second language, and you're trying to get into the home buying or home selling process. Reaching out to Trent might be a good idea because you can communicate at their level and kind of do some interpretation of the process, the contracts, everything that they need to know and think about.
Yeah.
And that's very valuable, and that's a nice thing to be able to offer. So when you got out of the military, it was not on your schedule, not on your time frame that you expected.
Yep.
A lot of veterans come over after they're exiting the military and they have a hard time figuring out where to go next.
I think that's the number one failure from the Department of Defense standpoint. They do a really good job at having programs and different schoolings that dudes can take prior to getting out so that they have something to fall back on. Like there's Boots to Business and CDL school and helmets to hard hats and all these different programs that they can take advantage of, which is great. The problem is understanding when you go from, and I'm going to use, especially a higher level operating unit, and you're just one day from the next no longer in it. How do you mentally transition into being a no one, into being just a regular everyday citizen? And you don't have that fast-paced environment. You don't have the constant, elevated mission set where now you're just feeling empty and trying to figure out, all right, what's my purpose in life? And we've failed our veterans a lot, I think. And I don't know what the answer is. I'm still figuring it out,
Yeah.
right? But when we talk about like 22 veterans commit suicide a day, how much of that is the transition piece? And I'm not saying that is. I'm just saying how much of that could be that transition piece where these guys they have that loss of mission, they have the lack of brotherhood and everything that they, learned to love in the military, and then being transitioned out in the civilian world where it's nothing. And I'll say that's been my biggest struggle.
Yeah.
Is figuring out where I belong.
Yeah.
So
It's hard to imagine. I remember at a very low level playing baseball and being on a baseball team and having a really clear identity, having a really clear group of friends. And these are somewhat comparable, obviously not the same level, but the concept is the same, where as soon as that ends, you lose a piece of who you are, and you lose a piece of your identity, your purpose, your value, your self-esteem, your self-confidence. And then you look around and those things are in the rearview mirror. And sometimes that happens pretty quickly. So it's hard to look forward and have a clear vision right away. And that period of time in between when you're kind of in limbo can be very difficult for people. It's not to mention all the other elements that you're bringing into your next phase of your life. You have combat experience, you have traumatic experiences that you've dealt with, you've had loss of friends, I'm sure. You've had all these events that have occurred and built up in the previous few years, and you're probably not getting a lot of help dealing with those emotionally because you're in these units where you're expected to be tough, strong, focused. There's not a lot of time to kind of deal with the internal elements of what you're dealing with. You're just compartmentalizing those and putting them aside. So how do you handle that when you get out? I mean, you go through a hard time. Some people do.
yeah.
Did you?
Extremely hard. I found comfort in, like my escape was sitting in my garage tinkering with, different things. And ultimately that's what created my first business of, just, and it wasn't for like a money aspect. It was kind of my escape,
Yeah,
right?
like a mission.
And I'll tell you, I got my job with the Food Bank of Eastern Michigan. I was the regional coordinator for all the food distributions within 5 counties, Tri-City areas. And you talk about complete opposite ends of the spectrum, going straight from a special operations unit to working at a food bank.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying that it wasn't rewarding, because it was, especially, I came into it and everything kind of happens for a reason too. I think my experience really helped me out navigate the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, because I was hired in December of 19.
Oh,
So I didn't even fully learn the job 100%, and we went right into a pandemic
yeah.
where everybody's laid off. Food distributions increased, tenfold. And then you go right from there into the floods,
Yep.
where, again, I don't know if I didn't get hired into that, same position, if we would have had the same response. So I kind of see it as like, oh, it's kind of meant to be.
Yeah.
Very rewarding, but complete opposite ends of what I was used to doing. So, and that lasted 2.5 years. Then I went to school to work with at-risk youth, disenfranchised youth, which I saw, myself as one of those kids growing up, and having a mentor to be able to say, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You don't have to be, a turd. You can do all of this. Look at all the different trade apprenticeships and all this other stuff where you can succeed and make a really decent living and be a great, contributing member of society and not have to go, that college route or not do anything. Right.
There's a theme here in your career, and it's all service.
Yeah.
A lot of service.
Yeah.
And now you're in a real estate service industry.
Yep.
So how does your experience working with the military, working with these other nonprofit organizations, how does all that culminate into becoming a great real estate agent serving your clients?
Whew, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is oftentimes buying their house is the biggest purchase they'll ever make in their lifetime, right? And we've all seen the horror stories of purchasing a home where it wasn't a Cinderella story, where it was very much a botched event, stressful, very humbling experience, if you will. And it happened to me in 2019 when I moved back with my wife from North Carolina here, purchasing our home. We didn't have a very good experience. It was not very organized, and we didn't really have that service on our side. So learning from those lessons, how can we do better? And, talk is cheap. We can sit here and talk about it all we want, but unless you're willing to jump in and do something about it, then you can't really cause change. So that was kind of the motivator was, hey, I don't want anybody else to experience what we did. Let's jump into this. Let's make a difference. Let's help people. Let's be personable. And yeah, I think that was really the main motivator.
You'd be surprised how many agents that come in when they start their careers, they have a very similar story. A lot of agents had a difficult transaction that they were a client in, and it stuck with them. And a lot of people listening, I think, have had negative real estate experiences. And those are very traumatic because buying or selling a house is a big moment in your life, financially, emotionally, mentally, all those different ways. And if you're not shepherded through that process with care and with organizational detail and proficiency and all the different skills that are needed to do that well, your experience can be very negative. And so I think I admire you for really pouring into your clients and making sure that they understand the entire process from start to finish, and then guiding and shepherding them through that process carefully. That's a big, big thing that is important to our company specifically, but doesn't always happen. When you're helping a client buy a house, what are some of the things that you help them to look for when they're looking at a house? Some things that you protect them with and make sure you point out to them so that they're always going in their eyes wide open.
Well, obviously you've got your basics, your roof, your foundation, everything like that, your main living components of the house.
Yep.
But I think one of the biggest factors that you can help your clients is listen to them. Don't automatically assume that you know which house is best for them. Listen to their needs, listen to their wants. And really, and when we did that huddle not too long ago, Aaron said it best. The client's in the driver's seat. We're in the passenger, right? We're just kind of directing and guiding, letting them know when the next turn's coming up, walk them through the 6 steps with the 18 moving parts where they might not understand what title insurance is, or they might not understand what using FHA versus a conventional offer in the same house might mean. And just looking at different elements and components that make the transaction successful or not, and listening to their wants, but also relying on your own experience and your expertise to be able to guide them through the purchasing of that home. So Tim does it great where, he'll have a scale where he rates how much that client wants the home. And if it's between an 8 and a 10, he's like, all right, well then we're going to get this. And if it's not an 8 or 10, that's fine. He's going to make the certain recommendations where he thinks, hey, this is to the point where you feel comfortable. Anything beyond this will probably get it. But if you don't feel comfortable with the transaction, then we want to make sure that your comfort level is number one. So placing clients' needs priorities first, listening to them, understanding what it is that they want, guiding them through the process, I mean, working in real estate, we can be, experts on everything real estate, but we shouldn't demean our clients in the process.
So for the veterans out there listening that want to buy or sell a house, obviously they should be calling you to work with you because you can connect well and relate and speak their language, right?
Yes. Yes. So if you guys are out there, get a hold of me. Love to help you out. I understand the VA home buying process, selling the homes. I mean, we sold our house in North Carolina to relocate here to Michigan. VA transactions in this area are a little bit difficult, a little complex, and but it's no fault of yours. So, yeah,
You'll get them through.
we'll get them through.
Necesito una casa.
Para toda la gente que estén escuchando o viendo este episodio, por favor, en algún momento si necesitan ayuda en comprar o vender una casa, estoy aquí a la orden. Estoy para servirles a ustedes. Yo sé que ese proceso puede ser un poquito complejo, pero si necesitan o requieren que alguien les pueda explicar el proceso completamente en español, estoy aquí a la orden.
Muy bien.
Muy bien.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Agent Podcast. Please follow at Modern Realty Midland on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you need to buy or sell a house, please reach out to Modern Realty by going to www.modernrealty.us. Modern Realty, your home, our focus.